I am so excited to get into this next video with you, as we're going to cover the basics on our next feminine archetype, the Maiden and Guide. Hi there, if you're new here, my name is Antonie and I talk about all things feminine self-development, including feminine energy, cycle syncing, and feminine archetypes. And my ultimate purpose here on this channel is to help women trust their intuition, avoid burnout, and live authentically with passion and empowerment. So if that sounds like something for you, make sure to click the subscribe button and keep on watching. So just in case you've just arrived into this channel, this video is part of a video series on the 7 feminine archetypes. And every woman or predominantly feminine person has access to all 7 archetypes. And it's super important for us to tap into all of them if we want to live a fully passionate and empowered life with meaning and purpose. And you can essentially think of these archetypes as characters or personas or parts of our personality. And they show up in every part of our lives and they play different roles in our lives. And so to make sure that you know all of the 7 feminine archetypes, let's just do a quick run through. So the feminine archetypes are the huntress, the sage, the intuitive, the regent, the mother, the maiden and guide, and finally the lover. And so with this video in particular, I am super excited to get into it, and I know that a lot of people have been waiting for it. And I am feeling particularly eager to get into this one. But that is not because this is my favorite archetype or because this is my leading feminine archetype, because it's not. The reason I'm so excited about getting into this one is because this archetype is, in my opinion, the most misunderstood and undervalued of the feminine archetypes in today's society. And I think it's about time that we debunk that and we start truly understanding the powers of this archetype. And I think this is especially important with the Maiden and Guide because this archetype will very often be the best counterbalance to some of the other archetypes. So like I mentioned before, we need to access all 7 archetypes. And most of the time, if you're stuck too much in one or a few of them, the best way to counterbalance that is by tapping into another archetype. And the Maiden and Guide will very often be one of the best archetypes to counterbalance the other archetypes. And so it's so important for us to fully understand and cherish the powers that this archetype actually holds. So let's start getting clear on what the qualities and strengths of the Maiden and Guide actually are. So to begin with, the more typically known qualities of the Maiden and Guide include: she's joyful, she's beautiful, playful, innocent, free-spirited, receptive, and incredibly friendly. And in a nutshell, this archetype is generally the one that's seen with that Disney princess energy. And she is someone who enjoys being taken care of and receiving support, guidance, and comfort from other people. And especially someone masculine in her life, like her partner or her father or even a brother. Now, there is a reason that I choose to call this archetype the Maiden and Guide, whereas most people will only refer to this archetype as the Maiden. And that is because there is a whole other layer to this archetype, because the Maiden and Guide is also kind, compassionate, empathetic, wise, warm, and incredibly inspiring if you allow yourself to see it and embrace it. And so here's what's unique about this particular archetype that none of the other archetypes have. And that is that the Maiden and Guide has a duality to her. So there are 2 parts of this archetype, which is again why I chose to highlight that and call her the Maiden and Guide, to really emphasize the fact that there is a duality to this archetype. And so you can kind of see it as 2 stages where she will grow from one to the other. So the first stage and the first part of that duality is the Maiden, which can generally be described as the qualities that we covered in that first bucket, meaning the joyful and free-spirited and lighthearted. And this part is the one that is a bit more like a princess. And even though she can hold on to all of these beautiful qualities even as she evolves into the Guide, if a woman stays as the Maiden, she can often become a bit naive and sometimes helpless. And she's often the woman who's been told that she can't do something, that she always needs someone to help her, that her role in life is to find a man who can take care of her. But if a woman transcends into the Guide, and into the second part of the duality, she can hold on to her qualities of being receptive, joyful, easygoing, lighthearted, but she grows beyond that kind of naive and helpless state, and she matures into the guide. And this part of the duality is the one that's described more in that second bucket of qualities that we covered earlier, where she actually becomes incredibly wise, compassionate, and has an incredible sense of empathy unlike anyone else. And so here is the problem and the pitfall that I do not want you to fall into. In today's society, as I have mentioned in some of my other videos, we celebrate masculine traits and abilities. We celebrate hard work, doing things independently, logic and reasoning, numbers and statistics, success and fame, and everything that is doing, meaning achievements and work and success and so on. Now the thing is, all of those things are essentially the opposite of what the Maiden and Guide represents. So society has basically conditioned you to suppress that part of yourself because that is not what's getting celebrated, valued, or very often respected by other people. And then on top of that, we have the feminist movement that, although it's meant to celebrate women and the feminine, it has done a really shitty job in one regard. And that is that in many groups of feminism, people are basically just saying that women should be treated and act in the same way as men and the masculine. And now do not get me wrong. In itself, it is not wrong to promote that women should have independence, that they should be celebrated for their intelligence and not just their ass, and that they should be treated fairly, equally, and with respect. So to all of that, I could not agree more. I am absolutely in agreement and on board and in celebration of that, absolutely. But the problem is that we've kind of gone too far in many ways, and we've neglected to create a safe, separate, and equal place for the feminine as to the masculine. Which means that all of those beautiful qualities of the Maiden and Guide, like receptivity, compassion, empathy, joy, ease, they get pushed aside to mean seen as lesser, seen as weak, and seen as those qualities you better hide or suppress or grow past if you want to be respected in today's world and if you want to move forward in today's world. And that is a problem, because instead of saying that women and the feminine should be treated equally and celebrated for who they are, we've been saying that they should be treated and celebrated as men and for the masculine traits that they bring. And that's not progress, that's just staying stuck. And not only that, but you as an individual suppressing these qualities that are within you keeps you operating mostly out of your masculine energy, keeps you stuck in a hustle mode, keeps you fixated on achievements that don't even bring you fulfillment, keeps you blocked from creating deep, meaningful friendships and community with other women, keeps you in a place of judgment towards other women that have managed to remain true to their feminine qualities, keeps you stuck in a place of having very high expectations and very little appreciation and empathy for other people, very much including male or masculine people, keeps you exhausted, burnt out, and tired all the time, keeps you living as a martyr instead of showing real strength and vulnerability of asking for and receiving help, keeps you arrogant in thinking that you don't ever need someone else's help, and keeps you stuck in a behavior that makes life harder for yourself with no real reason. Now again, I want to highlight, we need all 7 feminine archetypes. So I'm not telling you that you have to become dependent on a man, never to be independent on your own, not to cultivate your intelligence, to never go for goals or career. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that you cannot live a life of meaning, passion, and empowerment without all 7 feminine archetypes. Which means you need to learn how to embrace and tap into the Maiden and Guide as well, because without her, as with all of the other archetypes, you will always remain stuck. So now that you hopefully understand a bit better on what the Maiden and Guide is really about and why you need to start celebrating and honoring her, You'll also know, as with all of the other archetypes, she can have some potential downfalls, but activating the other archetypes will help balance out. So one really typical potential downfall for the Maiden and Guide is what many will know as the good girl syndrome. So she can get stuck in following other people's orders or desperately trying to live up to their expectations without really taking ownership over her own life and making her own decisions, regardless of how other people might disapprove of them. Another potential downfall for the Maiden and Guide is that she can struggle to keep a structure in her life, as well as take responsibility for her life. And so she will often be the kind of woman who always loses track of time, needs to cancel an appointment right before it's meant to be happening, who always manages to lose her keys, and essentially the kind of woman who just gets a bit lost in life, and who other people might not see as very reliable. And another potential downfall for the Maiden and Guide is that she can sometimes get a bit naive and have unrealistic expectations to life, thinking that things will just always turn out all right, instead of actually taking charge and taking responsibility for making sure that things will happen. Now, with all of these potential downfalls, I just want you to remember again that all of these potential downfalls are true and they are real, and they are downfalls that we can try to avoid and stay clear of. And that if you only live in the Maiden, or if you only live in the Maiden and Guide as opposed to activating all of the 7 feminine archetypes, you can fall into these downfalls. But I also want you to keep in mind what we covered earlier in the video, that society has a really wrong conception of this archetype. So a lot of times people will tell you, if you believe that things will work out for you and that you can live your life with joy and ease, or if you just have a deep sense of empathy and compassion to other people, they will start to deem you naive or tell you that you have unrealistic expectations, or that you don't understand what it's like to live in a man's world, or that you have to get tough and independent and always do things on your own, and that receiving help from other people makes you weak, and all of that kind of junk. And so again, with this archetype in particular, you need to learn to find the balance. You need to learn how to cherish and celebrate her qualities, and learn how you can tap more into them to find more ease and joy and compassion and empathy in your life, while also remaining aware of not going too far, of still holding on to the other archetypes, still knowing that in different times you can tap into different archetypes. But sometimes you can tap into the ease and joy and receptivity of the Maiden and Guide. Other times you can tap into the independence and goal orientation and dedication of the Huntress. So the only time that these downfalls are a real problem is if you only live in one archetype, or only in a couple. If you know how to tap into all of them, then these downfalls aren't that big of a deal. And again, there might just be a lot of misconception and judgment coming from people in society and people around you that don't fully understand the value of this archetype and the value of tapping into this archetype. And so let's get even clearer on this archetype with some examples from media. And as we go through it, you'll see that a lot of these characters display both of the dualities of both the Maiden and Guide. And a lot of times you'll see that they have grown from the Maiden into the Guide. So the first example that I feel like is just the perfect depiction of the Maiden and Guide in media is Aurora from the Maleficent movies. So she is joyful, free-spirited, beautiful, trusting, and potentially a little bit naive in the first movie. But then she also transcends into that wise, compassionate, but still joyful, easygoing, loving, playful, beautiful queen, which she literally turns into a queen. The second example of the Maiden and Guide is Emily in the Netflix show Emily in Paris. So this character, if you've seen the show, you know that she's way more career-oriented than most Maiden and Guides often will be. But she is still very joyful, a never-ending optimist. And she also is the type of woman who often gets a bit swept up by other people and goes in a million different directions. And then also kind of wishes for everyone's approval of her decisions and actions, instead of just kind of taking ownership and realize and accepting that everything cannot always just be peachy. And sometimes people need to go through stuff in their own time, and sometimes people aren't gonna like her. Another example of the maiden and guide for media is Anna from Frozen. Now this character is super joyful and bubbly and friendly, almost to an annoying level. And she's very, very trusting, not necessarily of the right people though. Which is why, again, tapping into more archetypes can help you decipher who to trust and when to actually be trusting and when to be a little bit more skeptical. Another example of the maiden and guide for media is Anne Hathaway's character in the movie Bride Wars. So this character is very kind and friendly, and she's someone who doesn't like to say no to people and go against what other people want. But then if you've seen the movie, you also know that after some time she matures into someone who can still be beautiful and lighthearted and friendly and compassionate to other people, while still also being someone who can stand up for herself. Another example from media of the maiden and guide archetype is Phoebe from the TV show Charmed, played by Alyssa Milano. Now with this character in particular, I feel like she's more in the maiden and guide in the early seasons. In the later seasons, she kind of grows more into the lover. But in the beginning, she is a bit of a mess. She doesn't really know what she wants in life, and she's been used to being the younger sister. And she's someone who knows how to have fun and is focused on more than work and responsibilities as opposed to her older sister Prue, for example. And you can see throughout the show, especially as she matures and she grows and she starts trusting herself more, you can see that she has a deep sense of wisdom and intuition and empathy, while also still holding on to those joyful, free-spirited, easygoing qualities. And the last example for media of the maiden and guide archetype is the character Bethany in the Jumanji movies, the ones that are made with The Rock. And so Bethany is a very typical girly girl who's very focused on beauty and having fun, and she is also a little bit naive. But then as she evolves, she transcends into someone who shows empathy and guides people, and even ends up risking her own life to save someone else. But even after she matures, she still holds on to the joy, ease, and free spirit of her archetype. So let's cover some ways that you can activate the maiden and guide archetype more in your life. So one of the most basic and easy things that you can do is to start focusing and doing more of those typically light feminine activities and things that you can do. So you can go shopping or wear makeup, incorporate more fun colors into your wardrobe, take a spa day, go out with girlfriends, anything that you can imagine is kind of that typical movie idea of what the feminine is all about. And then another way to activate more of the maiden and guide archetype within you is simply to focus more on joy and fun, and actually prioritize having fun in your life and doing things without an agenda or end goal in mind. Go to the movies, go rollerblading, go to an amusement park, read a fiction book, take a dance class, not to become an expert or be the best in class, but simply to move your body and have fun with some music, and maybe even connect with other women. Another way to activate more of the maiden and guide archetype within you is essentially to build your empathy skill. So practice placing yourself in someone else's shoes. Stop yourself from judging them and instead show them compassion. Be curious about their world and their experience, and allow them to share their world with you instead of you assuming that you already know what's on their mind and heart. And show more compassion with the people around you, and start having a bit more fun with things when they don't turn out the way you expected. And start having just a bit of a laugh and fun when your partner forgets to pick up that one thing that you asked them for at the grocery store. Or when they make a mistake, instead of making a big deal out of it and having those really high expectations of people to be perfect, have some fun with it, see the laughter and joy with it, and realize that if they made one little mistake, it's probably not the end of the world. And if you compare it to everything else that is happening and how long your life is going to be, then maybe this one little thing isn't really that big of a deal. And maybe you can just laugh and have some fun with it and give them understanding and love instead of a harsh critic. And then just before we wrap up, I know that this video was probably a little bit longer than the other ones, but we needed to cover some really important things about this archetype. I need to remind you, as I've mentioned in some of the other archetypes videos as well, that you are not the archetypes. You are the consciousness that gets to decide which archetype to activate, which archetype to listen to, and which archetype to step into in different times and different areas of your life. And so you can imagine that you have a round table of advisors, and you are the leader who values their input and is curious about their perspectives, but you still get to decide when to listen to which one and make conscious, aligned decisions for yourself. And this is how you can freely and safely tap into the Maiden and Guide, even if that is not one of your predominant archetypes. And even if you have a lot of resistance against tapping into joy, receptivity, ease, love, compassion, because you have a very limited mindset of what this archetype brings and what she holds because of what society has conditioned you to believe is valuable and respected. You can safely tap into this archetype when you need to stop taking things so seriously. Simply ask for help, knowing that you are also able to tap into the Huntress when you want to make progress on your goals, or the Sage when you seriously need to set a plan for the week, or the Regent when you want to show up with more leadership. And so in this way, you can draw on more than one side of yourself, and you can balance out the shadow sides that inevitably show up in your life if you don't learn how to tap into and activate all of the 7 feminine archetypes. And so even though we have access to all 7 feminine archetypes, there will usually be one that is a bit more predominant than the other ones, and that we just fall more naturally into. And so if you haven't already, make sure to take the quiz that I've created that helps you determine which is your predominant feminine archetype. And I'll add the link in the description box below. So I really hope that this video brought you some value. And I know it was a little bit longer, but I also hope that you see why it needed to be, and why it's just so important that we destigmatize everything that this archetype brings. And I really wanted to try to show you the powers of this archetype and how she's been so misunderstood and undervalued. So if you enjoyed it and you even stayed until the end, I hope you will click the like button. And also leave me a comment if you stayed until the end, and to represent the Maiden and Guide, leave me a comment with a pink heart so that I know you've stayed. I really appreciate you staying and watching, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. And don't forget to check out these ones, and I'll see you in there, or I'll see you next time.